So, thus far in this section, we've covered general circulation, the pattern of blood flow through the body. Then we moved into talking about the heart, the anatomy of the heart, the different blood vessels that lead into and out of the heart, how everything's connected. We then talked about blood, what it is, why it's important, the components of blood, the function. So today we're going to continue on. We're going to talk about the actual blood vessels that make up our body. And so there's three main types of blood vessels, and if you were to sort of take all of the blood vessels out of a human, sort of stretch them lengthwise, it will be 60,000 miles. So that's a huge distance. The reason all of those can sort of fit inside of our bodies is because the majority of the blood vessels are very, very small, very narrow, and they're all wound around surrounding all of our tissue. So the three main types of blood vessels are arteries, capillaries, and veins. And we'll talk about each in turn. So the first arteries, we mentioned this part when we were talking about the heart. Arteries are the blood vessels that carry the blood away from the heart out to various parts of the body. Arteries have to be pretty thick, pretty strong. They need to be elastic. The majority of them are carrying oxygenated blood to the various parts of the body. But there is an exception. The only artery that carries deoxygenated blood is the pulmonary artery. Why does the pulmonary artery carry deoxygenated blood? Ella? Yeah, because it's bringing the blood away from the heart to the lungs to get recharged. So that blood is deoxygenated. The arteries are made of smooth muscle. They're elastic, meaning they can stretch. And as they leave the heart, they sort of branch off and become narrower and narrower. Sort of like branches on a tree. Each time a branch splits, it becomes narrower. They're smooth inside, ideally. And they have to withstand pretty high pressure because as our ventricles contract, they force blood into our arteries at a very high pressure. And so they have to be able to stretch to absorb that pressure and without breaking or bursting. You can feel your arteries. Okay, and did we talk about this already?
No. Did it in house?
So your arteries are typically deeper in your body, sort of protected, because damage to an artery can be fatal. Because there's high pressure, damage to an artery leads to a lot of bleeding that's harder to stop. And so lots of times they're protected sort of deeper down inside the core of our limbs and our tissue. But some places you can feel them. So inside of your neck, if you take two fingers on the left side of your neck and bring them towards your throat and push in a little bit when you get halfway there, and this little indentation next to your trachea, you could feel in there your pulse. What you're really touching there is you're touching the outside of your carotid artery. Carotid artery is bringing blood from your heart up into your brain. Every time your heart beats, that carotid artery is swelling, and that's what you feel when you feel your pulse in your neck. You can feel it swell up each time.
Wait, can I see it?
So arteries withstand that pressure. They transport the blood through to the various parts of their body, and like we said, they branch off, get smaller and smaller and smaller, until eventually they're so small that they form the next type of blood vessel, which are capillaries. So arteries become capillaries once they get very, very small. And capillaries, basically, anywhere you have tissue in your body, it's surrounded by a network of capillaries. The capillaries are where materials can diffuse in and out of our blood. So this is where oxygen can diffuse out of our blood to cells of our body tissue. It's where nutrients can diffuse out. It's where waste can diffuse in, and so forth. So these capillaries are so narrow that blood cells, red blood cells, have to go through sort of one at a time. And as those blood cells are moving through, they're providing their nutrients, their oxygen, and taking in any waste products from the body tissue.
What was I gonna say? Like since our blood is getting, like cycled through, getting oxygenated, then going to our muscles and our organs and stuff. Like, how frequently would bone marrow have to produce new red blood cells? Because unless you like get a cut or something, like you're not.
Yeah, they only have like a relatively short lifespan. Actually, red blood cells die very quickly and get recycled in our body. So you're basically producing millions of blood cells every single day, and millions of blood cells are dying every day and being
Where do
recycled.
they go?
They go to your spleen, where they're broken down in your liver, and then the contents are basically recycled back into new blood cells eventually. So the capillaries deliver those materials to the body cells, and then once they've done that, they start to merge back together. These very tiny capillaries start to merge back together and become thicker, and they form veins, because that blood is headed back to the heart. Veins bring the blood back to the heart. Veins are thinner. They are not as muscular, not as strong. And that's because the veins, they do not have to withstand high pressure. Most of them are carrying deoxygenated blood, and the exception is, again, the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary vein leads from the lungs back to the heart, so that would be carrying oxygenated blood. So the veins start merging back together, getting larger and larger. Now, because there's lower pressure in the veins, there is the possibility that blood, because it's not being forced under high pressure forward, there's a danger that it could go backwards. But it doesn't, because veins have special valves in them, little one-way doors that allow blood only to go in a single direction. These veins merge back together till they form large veins, which eventually bring that blood back to the heart. So we have arteries, veins, and capillaries, and they're all connected. They're all interconnected. Their structure's a little different, but arteries turn into capillaries, which merge back together into veins. And that's called the capillary network. These capillaries are all throughout our entire body tissue.
Are these veins in the hands? Are those veins?
Those are mostly veins. Yeah, what you see in the back of your hand, those are veins.
In the wrist?
And they're
What about your wrist?
They're close to the surface also. There's not high pressure. They're not like, those are, so in your wrist you have mostly veins towards the surface. There's arteries a little deeper in.
I like stuff for circulation.
So sometimes these veins, not in your hands typically, a lot of times in people's legs, sometimes the valves break down and the blood sort of starts to pool in those areas and the veins start to swell up, especially as people get older. If you've ever heard of people having varicose veins, and sometimes you see on older people where their veins in the back of their legs are swelling up, that's because the valves have broken down. You could have them surgically removed and stuff.
How come some people have like veins like popping out of like their arms or like legs
If
when
they're
they work
super
out?
muscular?
So if you have you're very hydrated, your blood volume increases, your veins expand. If you have very little fat between your skin and your muscle tissue, then those veins can be more pronounced because there's less between them.
So I'm fat.
All right. So if we look at this diagram, this model of a capillary, so what we see is blood coming from this direction and leaving eventually this direction. So what would blood vessel 1 be called?
Artery.
Artery. 2?
Vein.
Vein. And the whole thing?
Capillary network.
Capillary. Yeah. All right. So as the blood reaches the capillaries, again, it has to move single file. It's so narrow, only one red blood cell at a time can actually fit through. And so you see that here. All right, so surrounding these sort of weird shapes here, these are just body cells of the various tissue. It could be in our brain, it could be nerve cells, it could be in our intestine, it could be in our muscles or our bones. We're just kind of making a generic picture here of these could be cells anywhere in our body. And what is 4 pointing to? The small circle.
Blood vessel, red blood cell.
Red blood cell. Yes.
RBC.
Now, the space around these cells is actually, it's not space. It's not just like air. You know what's surrounding all of our cells in our body tissue?
Water.
What? A fluid. That's basically plasma. We call it, when it leaves our blood, we call it lymph fluid.
What's a lymph node then?
It's a node that filters bacteria and things out of this fluid.
What's a node?
An enlarged area that has lots of white blood cells to filter things out of our lymph.
Oh yeah, lymphy.
All right, so look at arrow number 6. So what substance
Lumpy.
would be coming from a red blood cell and going into one of our body cells? Diksha? Not iron, but you're
Yes, iron.
on the right track. Nate? Oh, was your hand up?
Pizza.
Oxygen. So oxygen is carried by the red blood cells, and once those red blood cells get into the capillary, they can give that oxygen to various cells in our body. Number 7, what is this arrow pointing to? So these red blood cells, not pointing to the red blood cell, but
The plasma.
you see it? Yeah, that would be the plasma. Now, here's the question. What would be moving from the plasma into cells of our body tissue? So, into our body cells.
The glue.
Ellie? Yeah, nutrients. That's, could be glucose. It could be minerals and vitamins, amino acids. It's that other stuff is not carried by the red blood cells. It's carried by the plasma. And then number 9, what would be going from a body cell into the plasma? So going the opposite.
I know.
How?
Waste. Like
Yeah, that would be waste.
dead
Carbon
cells.
dioxide, other wastes would be moving from these cells into our blood to be taken away and to be disposed of.
I like to think they're working in like a factory, like express line. Like here's your.
So here's an actual
nutrients.
microscope
Yeah,
image.
waste.
So what you see here is, here's an artery. It's getting smaller and smaller. These are capillaries. You can see the blood cells are moving single file. In the background are cells, tissue, probably skin maybe or something like that. So these capillaries would be supplying the skin cells here with the nutrients that they need and also removing the waste products that these.
thought skin was dead.
No, skin's alive. I mean, the
Skin's
outermost
an
layer
organ.
is shed as those cells die, but your skin as a layer is alive. Now these are from that body exhibit.
What?
So basically all of these pictures,
Oh man.
these are only capillaries in these pictures.
Oh.
This
good.
obviously you still see some bone, but basically
It looks like a
you can
cabbage.
tell the
That's
entire
really
shape of something, including all the features of this person's face, just by looking at the capillaries. Because anywhere you have tissue, of muscle tissue, skin tissue, fat tissue, you have a capillary network that's surrounding it. So every single part of our body is infiltrated with these capillaries.
That guy looked like
All right.
a cabbage.
I want you to
He's dead, bro.
Yeah.
Dude, that dude's
cover up
I know.
the top slide.
He was alive at one point.
All right. What type of blood vessel is represented by A? Elizabeth? No hands for this. That is an artery, correct. What type of blood does it usually carry, Elizabeth?
Oh, those are for sure.
What? Well, it does, but a type of blood, not a part of the blood. Oxygenated.
I got that one wrong.
All right, number 2. Walker, what type of blood vessel is represented by B? And what type of blood does it carry?
Yeah, really?
Typically deoxygenated. There are those exceptions we talked about earlier, but typically it's deoxygenated. How about J? Ashley, what is J showing?
Where is that? It's lymph fluid.
That is lymph, yes. And what does it do? What's its purpose? Did you have an answer?
B?
Yes.
It does.
I think I
Drew?
can hold body cells.
It kind of, it surrounds the body cells. It provides something for material to diffuse into those blood cells. All right, what are these weird shaped things, Lily?
Body cells.
Those are cells of the body, could be anywhere.
I just put cells, bro.
What is structure C, Sean? Yes. What structure is represented by C? Sean?
Oh, me? Oh,
Yeah.
red blood cells?
Yes, those are red blood cells. Other Sean, what do they carry? Yes. How do they move through the capillaries, Edis? Single file, because they're so narrow.
I put one at a time.
That's fine.
Yeah, I know.
What part of the blood is represented by D, Zainab? That's plasma.
Ooh, I got that
What
wrong.
gaseous, means it's a gas, substance is represented by E? Sienna? What's moving from, we're going from a red blood cell into a body cell.
That's what it's pointing to?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
There you go.
What about F?
I got that.
Jake? Those are nutrients, correct.
I
Drew,
did
how
not.
about G?
Carbon dioxide.
Yeah, that is carbon dioxide or waste, we might say. Nitrogen waste, urea. There's a lot of different types of waste that would be carried. All right. Nate, which blood vessel is the thickest, most muscular wall?
I know it.
What? Correct. Which blood vessel is only a single cell thick, Tyler? Yeah,
Caterpillar.
Capillaries.
Yeah.
Which brings blood to the heart? Zainab. Veins. Which carry blood away from the heart, Jack?
Artery.
Which blood vessel is the site of oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrient waste exchange, Colin?
Capillaries, also known as the caterpillar.
Which blood vessel carries the highest oxygen content, Lily?
The artery.
Yes. Which blood vessel typically carries highest nutrient content, Ella? Also artery. By what process do materials enter and leave the capillaries, Ashley? Through diffusion, yes. Materials diffuse from high to low concentration.
Let's call it a day.
All right, so let's finish up today by talking.
Sounds good.
Well, actually, we're running out of time.
That's surprise.
So we'll talk about this tomorrow.
That's what the
That is no way.